Okay, so for those that heard, my name is Joshua McGuoirk, and Stephen Lucy here had asked me to give a small presentation on home preparedness, disaster management, and all that good stuff. So one of the jobs that I failed to mention was I'm also part of Pennsylvania's Urban Search and Rescue Team. So where you see the hurricanes, tornadoes, and where FEMA is deployed, I'm with the Pennsylvania Task Force and have been deployed on multiple missions, usually hurricanes. So think Harvey, Ida, Rita, Katrina. We were going into these areas that were hard hit, natural disasters. One of the other major events that I was on with just over a year now was the Champagne Tower collapse in Miami, Florida.
Mm.
And that was terrible. Over 100 lives lost. So you start thinking about, what do I prepare for? I mean, I can't control a building collapse. I can't control the weather, but what are some of the things that I can control? So I started, and then, thinking about the older population, the senior community, if you will. What are some of their concerns? So I started doing a little bit of research, and there's a lot of, so you get savvy enough where you're zooming. So we're doing this through the interwebs, and a lot of this information that's out there is free and it's easily accessible. So a couple easy websites to go to would be, FEMA.gov and ready.gov. Ready.gov would probably be the easiest one to navigate because it's all about home preparedness. You also look at the AARP. They also have a big section on uh, being prepared for the senior community. The American Red Cross, same thing. They have documents that you can download and fill out. And as I was going through all of this research, if you will, what I found is a underlying issue or problem, and then making the responses with the FEMA task force. I found that as we were interfacing with the community, one of the biggest things that they were asking about was medication and documentation. And then as I go on the ready.gov, FEMA.gov, as I stated before, the Red Cross and AARP, those two things pop up all the time. Now, and just things that I don't think about because I'm not on any medications, and I'm not retired, so I don't think about the my future finances. And when you look into it, so Steve had also sent me some questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them as I go through my notes. So I was talking with my wife as well about this particular topic, and I was saying to her that, and she works in the medical field as a nurse practitioner, and one of the issues that she comes up with a lot is the social network. And as I was reading more and more documentation about this subject, I found that having a good support network is what's going to get us through a lot of these troubling times. So what do I mean by a support network? Well, family, of course, friends, and neighbors. Now, what should they know? What shouldn't they know? As I read through the documentation, and my understanding is you should give them an idea of where you are. So you have options when it comes to disasters. The two big options are you going to evacuate or are you going to shelter in place? So sheltering in place is staying at home, locking all doors and windows, battening down the hatches, as it were, and waiting it out, whatever that disaster is. Or are you going to evacuate? Now it's nice to say to people, hey, let's we got a storm coming or a tornado coming or some sort of disaster. And you just look at like the pandemic as a more recent. What should I have? What shouldn't I have? Now, when I evacuate, where do I go? So that's a big question. Do you go with friends? Do you go with family? Do you go with neighbors? It's also good to let these people know If you are going to evacuate, where are you going to evacuate to in case we need to get a hold of you? Or just so we know. So as an example, when I was going on some of these hurricane deployments, we would literally knock door to door to see if people were home. And let's say that we got somebody at, in the 100 block of Nippon, we would start grilling them, who are your neighbors and where are they? And are they home? And more often than not, we would say, or we would hear, I don't know. So it's good information to let your friends, family, neighbors know where you're going to be in case something bad does happen. Now, it's also recommended in a lot of documentation that you have a key holder close by. So working for the fire department, we go on a lot of check on well-being. So what does that mean? It means that a family member or a neighbor has not seen their neighbor or family member in quite some time, either seen them or heard from them, spoke to them. And many times they'll call 911. The police will show up. The police will try to make entry. And then they'll call for the fire department to make entry to the property. And more often than not, in the 25 plus years that I've been with the fire department, the house was empty. So they either went to a doctor's appointment, they went to a friend's house or a family member's house and didn't tell anybody. Now, the good news is that I would easily say that over 90% of the time, we're not breaking down your front door. What we've also found in the fire department, and don't be scared by this, but generally speaking, second floor windows are typically not locked. So typically we'll put a ladder up to a second floor window, open up the screen, open up the window, and then make entry that way. Many times we will also leave a note or something in the house to let you know that it was not a burglar, but it was police and fire that came in to check on your well-being. If you are considering evacuating because of a natural disaster, what is recommended is that you do shut off all your utilities. So your gas, your water, and your electric. Now, I understand that you may or may not have the tools, but somebody on the block may. And by having a good social network or support network, that'll assist you in shutting down those utilities. Of course, closing all your windows and doors, making sure they're locked if you're going to leave. Consider leaving a note on the front door that you left, but that's kind of a double-edged sword as well. What we found with Hurricane Harvey in Texas, and you guys may have seen pictures or photos post-disaster where FEMA will spray paint on houses. They usually paint a big X. Who was there, who searched it, what time they searched it, and what date they searched it, and what they found. There are nefarious individuals out there, and we live in a big city, that will see those markings, understand what those markings are, and know that that is an easy prey to loot. I'm not saying it's right, but that is a fact. But I would still make the argument, make sure everything's shut down, all your utilities, lock all your doors, and then go to a safe haven. So other things to consider for preparedness, thinking about weather. Generally speaking, we're pretty good in the Northeast United States. We typically don't get hurricanes, or if we do, they're very infrequent. We typically don't get flooding. And when you look at the altitude of, can I safely assume that everybody lives in the Mount Airy community? That was a question. All your mics are off.
The answer is yes.
All right, good. So living in Mount Airy, I want to say that I think it's close to 125 feet above sea level. So to have a flood up in this general region would be very rare. So it's not floods that we're not. That's not an issue. Tornadoes typically are not an issue in the Philadelphia region. Sometimes we'll get heavy downpours. Sometimes we'll get the tail end of hurricanes coming through. And if you've ever had water damage, that's terrible. It's terrible to get rid of all that water. So things to consider, cleaning out your gutters, making sure your downspouts are in good shape. I know that generally a lot of the houses up this way have yard drains, making sure that they're clear. If that stuff starts to back up, you start flooding your basement, that'll be terrible. And the other thing we have to consider, post-disaster, are the restoration companies. They can be like sharks, especially in the Philadelphia region. So prior to the state police taking over the major interstates, I-76, 676, and I-95, it was run by the Philadelphia Police Department. And when an accident occurred, it was first come, first served with a lot of the tow truck companies. And the tow truck companies used to race the fire engines and sometimes even race the police cars to the scene of the accident to try to get the car and then get the insurance and everything else. Well, because the state police took over, the state police has a contract with a towing company. So what are all these tow operators going to do? Well, they went into the restoration business. So now when there's a disaster or when there's a fire, they can be like sharks coming out, and they put a lot of pressure on the communities. And it's a real shame. And you really have to watch out for those people. And what I would recommend on all of them is to say no, that I don't want your service. I will go through my insurance company. That's why we've been paying insurance for all these years. It's their job to restore your property. Now, if it's a natural disaster and you get governor and presidential declarations, then you can go through FEMA as well. Unless it's an outfit that you've heard of, a big outfit, federal, FEMA, I'm from the federal government. I'm here to help. I get that joke. Just be very weary of who you're letting around you, because there's a lot of scammers, especially on the internet. I mean, I know a Nigerian prince, if you give him, $10,000, he'll give you back $1 million. So remember that scam that was going around about 20 years ago, but they're still going around. You want a prize in Amazon, you just call back our number. A lot of scams. So you need to be very wary of that. Another recommendation is if we know that we have high winds, if we know we have hurricanes coming through, another recommendation was if you have anything loose on the exterior property so it doesn't go flying around, is to bring it indoors. Unless you don't want it anymore. Maybe it's already broken. But bring anything that's going to fly around indoors. So that's the basis for how to prepare for, if you have the storms. So other people have asked, how much food should I have on hand? And what about water? So let's get practical about this. We're not preppers. We're not going to store lots of food. We're not going to store gallons of water. Now, the human body is pretty resilient. The human body can live for approximately 30 days with no food and just water only. So you say, okay, how much water do I need? So when you look at a lot of the disaster and preparedness websites, they say 1 gallon per person per day for a minimum of 2 weeks if I'm going to stay home. Well, who's going to carry or keep 20 gallon, 14 gallons per person of water around? So, and let's just say that the water supply fails. Now, there are numerous backup systems. We're lucky enough where we're in a class 1 city where we have a lot of backup systems with our water supply, our gas supply, and our electrical supply. Now, electrical will take a little bit longer if the electric goes down. But for the most part, our gas supply and our water supply will continue to operate even during disasters. So, but for some reason, let's say that it does fail. What do we do for water? Well, it's recommended that if you have a bathtub, you fill the bathtub. And then you could use that water to either cleanse yourself or to flush toilets. Let's say I did not have the foresight to fill my bathtub and I did lose my water supply. Unless you have hot water heat on demand, most of us have hot water tanks in the basement, and they could be anywhere from 30 to 50 gallons, depending upon the size of your house. If you shut off your water supply to the house, you have anywhere from 40 to 50 gallons of potable water in your hot water tank. That's easily enough to get out. It's just a garden spigot on the side of it, and you could fill buckets and use that as drinking water. Your standard toilets in the tank, don't drink from the bowl, but in the tank, you have anywhere from 3 to 5 gallons of water per tank, as long as you don't have a, flushless system or whatever. So just looking at that, the standard houses in the Mount Airy region have at least 2 toilets. Some have 3. A lot of us have hot water tanks. That's 50 gallons right there, give or take, depending upon the size of our hot water heater. So I wouldn't be overly concerned with water. Most of the houses up here as well have gas service. Now, if you lose your electrical service, depending upon what type of range you have, you may not be able to light the range, electronic starts. But just because you can't light it with the electronic start does not mean that you can't light it with a match or a lighter. So you could heat up the water, you could boil the water if you were overly concerned, you can heat up food. You would just have to manually light the burner each time. Now, what's recommended? Don't put it on high. Don't let the gas run. Be prepared with your match, be prepared with the lighter. In order to start it, put it on low. So now you have at least you can use the stove top. Now, as for food, what did we see during the pandemic? There was going to be a mad rush at all the supermarkets. Anytime we hear about snow in the city of Philadelphia, what happens? There's a mad rush on the supermarkets. You would think that everybody was going to be at home making French toast, bread, eggs, and milk. I don't know who's all making French toast during the storms, but okay. I wouldn't stock up on food. I would not become a prepper, if you will, on food. I would look at maybe, your normal 3 days of food, per person. And I would suspect that the majority of us have enough food in their pantry to easily last 3 days, if not longer. As I stated, when those natural disasters, you start rationing. You can get away with a little bit to eat every day as long as you have plenty of water. And of course, you want to, monitor that. So what if the electric goes out, and what if I need to hear communications? What's going on? What's the city telling us? What's the governor telling us? It's recommended that you get a radio. So I did and honestly, fellas, I do not have one. But I was looking on Amazon, and I'm afraid to say it, I do buy from Amazon. And there is a Midland, Midland. They make a radio that works off of batteries and hand crank. So, what if your batteries fail? Well, then you can hand crank it, and you got AM, FM radio, as well as the weather reports that come out of NOAA.gov. Now, what's nice about that unit, it was about $50. That's if you want to spend that much money. But what was nice about that unit is that it also has the ability to charge cell phones. So, cell phones today is the lifeline. Under the Reagan administration, he made sure that everybody had landlines in their house. And then under the Obama administration moving forward, made sure that we had a good cellular network. Now, the cellular network is only going to be as good as the cellular towers. What if the towers lose power? So if the towers lose power, I know at least with Verizon and on the various disaster responses that I've been on, because it's money if a tower goes down, they have brought in mobile towers. Now it's not going to be the next day, but just have your phone ready so that when those towers go back up, you will have connectivity, and then you can make necessary notifications to, again, friends, family, and neighbors. So that's on the communication side. Another recommendation for natural disasters was to take a good inventory of your house. What are your valuables and all of that? Taking pictures of it so that should the insurance company ask for those pictures, like, did you really have that stuff? You can show them the pictures. It's also recommended that you print them out and that you have them in a safe place. So one of the questions that Steve had forwarded me was, do you recommend a particular safe or document holder? Well, no, not necessarily. And you know that the prices range far gamut. I've seen anywhere from $20 for a pouch that's both waterproof and fireproof, all the way up to thousands of dollars for a safe. Now, do you really need a safe? Well, I don't know what you have, but my initial argument is going to be no. I think many of us can get away with, about a $20 document pouch that is both waterproof and fireproof. Now, what are we going to put in that document pouch? So we're going to put a list of all of our medications and our frequency. And when I talk about, let me just back up one step there. When I talk about food and water, it's not just for you, us humans, but I know some of our humans like to have pets. So that's something else a lot of people don't take into consideration. Do I have cats? Do I have dogs? And do I have enough food? Do I have enough water for them as well? Uh, so don't forget your pets, and are they on any medications? So getting back to the medications, having a list and having multiple lists of these medications stored in separate locations. So one would be, going into your document pouch for the big disaster. But what if you have a regular medical emergency where you're going to call, there's no uh, incident going on, there's no natural disaster, but you're having some sort of medical episode at home and you're going to call the 911 system. Generally in Philadelphia, when the EMTs and or paramedics show up at your residence, one of the questions they're going to ask you is, are you on any medications? Yes or no. Oh, you are on medications. Do you have a list of them? Do you have extras? Do you have it ready to go with you? So just being prepared. Many of the sites that I went to recommended that you keep a week's worth of medication on standby just for that uh, disaster, for having an emergency. It's also recommended that you speak to your primary care physician to set that up. How do I store these medications for long-term use? How do I get extras for the long-term use? And the likes of that. So that's one topic. So when you're looking at your basic emergency supply kit, your for your disaster plan, I'm going to hunker down, I'm going to stay at home. What are some of the things that I need versus the things that I want? So I spoke about water, food, also a small personal first aid kit. I'm not talking big money here. You can get a cheap one, and we all should have it. I mean, what do you do for little scrapes and dings in your own home? Band-aids, compresses, little stuff, and you can get a whole pack for about $15. We're not talking about a lot of money. So my wife had mentioned also about lighting. What if the power goes out? Should we light candles? And the answer is no. And why shouldn't we light candles? Well, if the power's out, there's the potential that the phone lines could be out. And then what if I had a fire? That would be terrible. So I recommend, and many of the websites and resources that are out there recommend that you get a flashlight, battery operated. There are some out there that are hand crank, but I would just get a battery operated and get an LED style bulb in it. LED bulbs last a very long time versus an incandescent bulb. Incandescent bulbs, you would be burning through batteries within a day versus LED. You can get away with LED lighting for quite some time. Now, those are kind of the essentials that I mentioned, water, food, first aid kits, flashlight, the emergency radio, your medication record, and prescription drugs on hand. Now, what are some of the things that I like to have? What are some good extras? Well, your standard hygiene items, toothbrush, toothpaste. But if I don't have water to clean myself, how am I going to get away with that? Well, you can brush your teeth with a little bit of water, but how do I keep myself clean? So a good recommendation, and we use this in FEMA when we're deployed, because when FEMA gets deployed, we're going to very bad areas, areas that have been devastated, who don't have good water, who don't have electric. So how do we keep ourselves clean? Baby wipes. So we'll wipe, ourselves down, our hands, our face, make sure we have good hygiene. And you see it all the time. The CDC puts that out there. How do we protect ourselves from viruses? How do we protect ourselves from bacteria? And it all comes down to just good hand washing practices. So even when we are deployed, and one of the things that we have to be concerned about is, a sickness going through the company, because we deploy with approximately 80 people. And if one person gets sick, and because we're working, in close proximity to one another, we all can get sick. And if we're sick, then we're out of the game, and we cannot provide the assistance that the local community needed. So baby wipes really go a long way. And I've seen a lot of them in the store that are vacuum packed, so they can sit on shelves for quite some time without, worrying about expiration dates. Do you have extra clothing? Well, I'm sure we all have some sort of extra clothing, but blankets, we're getting into winter. What kind of equipment do you keep in your vehicle? Do you drive in the winter? Having a blanket in your vehicle is nice. If you're going to stay home, I suspect that you have enough blankets. Uh, Another recommendation is getting a whistle. We're getting older, our voices don't travel as far. So how do we get people's attention? Well, one way is we can use a whistle. I do a lot of traveling through air flights, and if you've been on an airplane, which I'm sure many of you have, they show you that there's a whistle available on the life vest. Now, I'm sure if we go down in the ocean, I don't know how well that whistle is going to be, but here in our community, we're fairly close, and we should be able to hear our neighbors that are with us. So having a whistle might help. And of course, now that we are post-pandemic for the most part, it's recommended that you have a face mask. Um, and it's going to be for the larger particles. If we're having water issues, one of the issues or another big issue that's going to come up is sanitary. So what's going to happen with our sanitary sewers and storm drains? They're going to eventually start backing up because we won't have the water to flush it all down. And if should any of the storm drains become clogged, and fill up, that is all that wastewater is not good for the community and becomes breeding grounds for all kinds of pesky stuff. So what are some of the other things that we want in our plan checklist? So I spoke about the vital document packet. Like I said, we're not talking big money here, but you may or may not have access to a printer. You may or not have access to a scanner. Take all of your vital documents, and we'll go over what some of them are, but take all your vital documents to your local Staples or Office Max, or you choose your photocopier center. I think the UPS now does it up on Gresham Avenue over by the Acme. And you can scan all of your documents. Keep them in separate places. So, of course, we want one in our home because that's where we live. But consider giving one to either family or friends to hold on to, particularly family. Um, so, what is included in your vital document checklist? Well, it's recommended that you have your ID. So, photocopy the front and back side of your personal identification. I already spoke about your medical record, but something to consider are your immunization records, your Social Security and health insurance cards. I'm going to go on a sidebar here on a Social Security. If you're on Social Security, it is recommended that you have direct deposit, because if there's a natural disaster, if there's anything that comes through that may disrupt the mail service, your electronic deposit will always be deposited into your bank account. Now, that being said, too, electronic, you'd want to have some cash on hand. Now, I'm not talking thousands of dollars. I'm talking maybe a few $100s of cash on hand. Because if the power's out in the neighborhood or the power's out at your local bank, how are you going to make withdrawals? How are you going to conduct the transaction? And I know we're getting more and more into an electronic world, where we have credit cards and we have debit cards, where now we don't even have to swipe it. We can just tap it, and they can take the money out of our account. So consider doing electronic deposit if you normally get checks and have some cash on hand. Uh, Now, nobody says how much cash you should have on hand, but some websites that I went to recommended approximately $300. So I'm not talking about breaking the bank here. Do you have a will? Do you have copies of your will? And who has copies of your will? What insurance policies you have? So when you look at insurance policies, I'm talking about health insurance, homeowners insurance, rental insurance if you're a renter, and or homeowners insurance if you own a home. What are those insurance policies? Do you have any contracts, deeds, stocks, bonds? Have copies of all of that in case you need to get a hold of that information. It's recommended to have your recent tax returns. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Any other family records, birth, marriage certificates? Are you divorced? Do you have your divorce papers? Who has power of attorney? Who has medical power of attorney over you as well? And having all of that stuff together. What other important contacts do you have? Names, telephone numbers, addresses of friends, families, your doctors. Who are your insurance companies? Do you have their telephone number and contact information? And anyone else who needs to know where you are, which we spoke about that already. And generally speaking, that's what you want in your document bag. Do you have passports? That's another item that was recommended, to photocopy your passport and put that with your document records as well. And again, keeping that in a safe location. So what's a safe location? Well, you be the judge, but being a fireman for 25 plus years and working with FEMA for 14 years, I found that the best places are lower. So you would look at either under the bed or in your basements, because where we see fires is usually going to be on the upper levels, and things that are placed on the lower level or even the lower portion of that floor will be protected by the furniture. So as I stated, like under the bed, under a dresser, something to that effect, the piece of furniture will protect that item. And we generally will move a lot of the furniture in a fire to ensure that we have extinguished all fire. And you could tell the fire, so we also work with the community after a fire on getting a lot of the medications out of the house, getting pets out of the house, getting vital documents out of the house, and knowing where those things are will make your lives a little bit easier. Another thing to consider are what are the websites that you go to for your insurance company, for your bank, uh, where you do your banking and all your financial stuff. What are the user IDs and passwords? So that's another reason why you'd want a hiding spot, uh, because sometimes we can be forgetful. Now, I know that our regular laptop or our regular desktop many times will save that information for us. What's my logon ID? What's my password? But what if I don't have access to my laptop? What if I don't have access to my desktop? What if I have to go up the street to the library at Sedgwick and log into the internet that way? What are those websites? What are those login IDs? And what are those passwords in order to access all of my information? So I think that about covers it for the vital documents, things to consider. Oh, pet ID tags, getting back to pets. So your big thing that comes up is how do we identify pets? And I don't know how close you guys were with following the Ukraine war, but there was a website dedicated for all the lost pets when a lot of the Ukrainians were fleeing the country, you know, cats and dogs. So what are the pet IDs? How do we identify them? How do we know they're yours? So proof of ownership, proof of vaccination. Uh, did you have a microchip installed? That seems to be a thing now. With Apple, I know Apple computers, you know, Apple has something called an air tag where you don't have to put a microchip inside the animal, but you can put a tag on their collar and then you can identify them on using like Apple Maps or a mapping service. Do you have, are your pets emotional support pets? And do you have documentation to back that up? So there's a big difference between having a pet and an emotional support animal. Um, Many facilities, evacuation facilities, will not allow pets indoors. However, they will allow an emotional support animal. So can you back that up? Do you have the documentation to state that that pet is, in fact, my emotional support animal? Do you have any service animals? So if you're blind, do you have you know, CNI dog, and do you have all the documentation for that as well? We spoke about housing, you know, your lease, rental agreements, mortgage, real estate, uh, deeds of trust, so on and so forth. Any other bills that you have, so that it's also considered, or you're to consider your utility companies. So generally for us in Mount Airy, it's going to be Pico, PGW, Verizon. Do you have oil service? You want to make sure you know, you tell them, don't send me a delivery. Do you own a vehicle or do you lease a vehicle? Do you loan a vehicle? Do you have all those documents? Any credit cards, alimony payments, child support payments? I'm just going through my notes. So we spoke, oh, life insurance. I missed that one. Do you have life insurance? Put that in there, copies of it. Pet insurance, homeowners insurance. And here's a morbid one, but funeral insurance. Some people have that. Do you have copies of it? Do you have recent pay stubs for all of your latest income? What government benefits do you get? Now, all of the documentation that I mentioned, it's recommended that you update it every 6 months. Now, I'm guilty. I'm not here pounding my chest telling you to do it every 6 months. I am guilty. My wife and I did a will approximately 20 years ago. And in our will, we still have our children who are 22 to 28 going to my brother in case of an emergency. They're a little bit older now, and we need to update our will. So I'm not here, you know, preaching from the pulpit, as it were. I too need to get my own house in order. Going back to medical information a little bit, we spoke about who is your primary care physician. Do you have any medical specialists? Do you have copies of your health insurance cards? Do you have copies of your prescription cards, Medicare cards, Medicaid cards? I spoke about your immunization records. We spoke about what medications you take on a regular basis. Do you have copies of your current prescriptions? Are you on any medical devices? Do you need oxygen? Do you need heart monitors at home? You know, what happens if that supply goes down? So if you log into ready.gov, they will put you in contact with the Office of Emergency Management with the City of Philadelphia. And they have a whole health section and they can put your name on a list. So if you have any medical devices that require power, or require frequent delivery, you can be put on that list, and they will make a concerted effort to either get you backup supplies, move you to a location that has electric, um, get your oxygen supplied, things like that. And that would all be done through the Office of Emergency Management, City of Philadelphia. And it's easier just to go to ready.gov, because at ready.gov, there's a lot of resources on there uh, for all the various natural disasters. There's also many checklists on that website as well. So if you were not taking notes during this presentation, you can easily log onto that website. You can download their checklists and fill it out at your leisure. Uh, and of course, it's not something that has to be done tomorrow, but keep it in the front of your mind, start putting it together, and then over the course of the next couple weeks to a couple months, before you know it, you will be prepared. Do you have a list? So getting back to medical devices, do you have a list of those models, serial numbers? Who are the suppliers? What agreements do you have? Do you have IVs at home that you need? Do you have home health care? Do you have nurses that are coming out? One of the big things during a lot of these disasters, Katrina comes to mind. We think about being in a big city. We think about, we call 911 and the police department's going to show up and the fire department's going to show up, or, the government's going to come in and help us. And what did we find out in Katrina in New Orleans? All of that failed because we are human, both firefighters and police officers. And now, not all of them, of course, but there were some that were more concerned about their own family than the community. So they evacuated just as the community evacuated. And those that did not evacuate had a harder time. And we remember seeing those videos of people having to chop holes through their roofs in order to get onto the roof to be medevaced out through by way of chopper. So we do have to be a little bit more self-reliant. If we're going to evacuate the area, we want to look at 3 days. But if we're going to shelter in place, we're going to hunker down, we're going to stay at home, which is usually the best recommendation, then we need to think about a 2-week plan before government starts getting their own act together and before they can start mobilizing. Do you have any other disabilities? Do you have trouble walking? Can you climb stairs? Can you get out on your own? Again, going on to ready.gov, working with the Philadelphia's Office of Emergency Management, they could put notes in the computer, red flags, if you will, for your residents to let responders know what may or may not be required at that residence. There's many times that we go on dispatches uh, where our dispatch center will tell us that it's reported in the dispatch computer that there is a person with disabilities in the home uh, and where they might be located. So for an example, the second floor front bedroom has an invalid. And we know that when we go to this property to check the second floor front bedroom, I mean, we're going to check out the whole place, don't get me wrong, but we will make that a primary focus. Do you have any living wills, power of attorney? I mentioned that already. Going back to pets, thinking about who's your veterinarian and what records do you have with that, with immunizations and any pet prescriptions as well. Now switching gears a little bit with household contacts. Do you have contacts with your bank, mortgage companies, doctors, dentists, other healthcare providers, your insurance agents? Are you a veteran? Who's in charge of your military benefits? Do you have your DD 214, which is your discharge papers from the military? Any other social services? Do you have lawyers, financial advisors? But really, it's going to come down to a good support network, going full circle, going right back to the original problem here. And this is what we need, is a stronger community, stronger neighborhoods. We look at the city of Philadelphia, it's supposed to be a city of neighborhoods. And yet I would suspect that we can't name the majority of our neighbors. So looking out for our neighbors, looking out for friends, looking out for families, and keeping in contact with them, saying hello, making sure that they're all right. Now, in a disaster, you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Safety and security is first, and you're going to be thinking about yourself until we get all the way up to self-actualization. But communities that stick together, communities that work together, will live longer. And those are the facts. There's a lot of data out there on that, with people working together.
That's why we invited you to move into our community, Josh.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Right. So fire safety, I quickly mentioned that. I said if we're going to evacuate, we want to attempt to secure all our utilities. I would not recommend lighting candles if you're going to hunker down, because there could be that potential that one of those candles falls over. Now what? Now, granted, non-emergency. We call 911, and we're in a class 1 city. You're going to get a fire engine at your location within 5 minutes. And a fire doubles in size every 30 seconds. So you think about that. What appears to be a small fire, what appears that I can just grab a fire extinguisher and put this out, you would be better off calling 911 first and getting the wheels rolling. Let's say that you call 911, you have a fire truck coming, and you still grab the extinguisher and you're able to extinguish it. Well, when the firemen show up, you tell them, you show them where the fire was. I was able to extinguish it. We have cameras. We can make sure that it's not behind your walls or in your ceilings, that it didn't get too out of hand. But always call 911 first. Don't try fighting fires by yourself because of that threat. Let's say you discover a fire in a bedroom, and maybe you do have a fire extinguisher. Maybe you don't. It doesn't matter. Close the door. Close the door to that room and close the doors to any other rooms on the way out. So Underwriters Laboratory, you see, when we buy electronics, you'll see a UL sticker on it. And UL did a lot of studies with the fire departments all over the country. And they did studies on what they call fire flow paths. If you leave the front door open, if you leave the bedroom door open, you're creating a natural chimney that fire wants to breathe. Now, do not lock your front door on the way out. Now I get it, emotions are going to be running high. Anxiety is going to be high. Blood pressure, pulse rates, respiration rates are going to be high. It's going to be a scary situation. And you're going to think about slamming the door behind you. If you can, take a breath, unlock the door, or just keep it barely open. And that'll make it that much easier for the firefighters to get into your property. If you can give them any information when they show up on location, where is the fire? That's going to be well, the first question is going to be, is anybody in the house? Life safety is always number 1. Is anybody home? Number 2 is going to be, where's the location of the fire? That way they're not running all over the house trying to search for it. Is it in the basement? Is it in the kitchen or first floor? Or is it on the second and or third floor? And as I said, if you can shut that door, you're really going to limit the fire damage to your property. Now, smoke, the smoke will do the damage on the floor itself, but that's easily fixable. Fire is going to be a little bit harder.
Josh, we have a question in the chat. How do you
Yes.
register someone who has a disability with a local firehouse or what?
All right. So I missed the first part of that question, Steve.
How do you register someone who has a disability? Linda, if you're still there, you may want to clarify, but I'm reading what one of our participants wrote. How do you register someone who has a disability? With the local firehouse?
Oh, I see it now. Right. I just opened up the chat. Okay. So how do you register somebody who has a disability with the local firehouse? No. So the easiest way to do that, again, would be to go to ready.gov, and they'll put you in contact with the Office of Emergency Management with the City of Philadelphia, and they have a whole health section. And once they flag your property, they'll put it in the dispatch system so that anytime there's a dispatch to that property or that residence or that apartment, uh, we are given that information.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Josh, you've covered a huge amount of ground, and many of us are probably thinking, as I am, are you for hire to help organize all of our papers and equipment and stuff?
You're funny, Steve, but I'll leave you at this, which kind of sounds snooty because I've turned down a lot of work. I don't leave my house for less than $1,500 a day plus expenses.
Well, it looks like we're going to have to check into our piggy bank.
But as you know, I mean, I've always, I'm just getting some of my paperwork squared away here, getting it out of the way, because like there are still other questions on the email that you submitted me. And for the most part, I've helped out a lot of the neighbors around the neighborhood for free. Um, you know, I've done smoke alarm installations and inspections. I've done multiple, you know, throughout the years. I want to, again, to reiterate to our community, these smoke alarms are free. So however we want to organize it, I know in the past when we did it, when I did this a much briefer presentation in the past, I took down people's names, telephone numbers, and addresses, and we installed, well, me, but through the Philadelphia Fire Department, they supplied the detectors through grant programs. I think that one go around, we did over 100 installations of smoke detectors. Now, it wasn't 100 properties, but it was 100 smoke detectors that I
Okay.
put out. And most recently, I think I installed 4 on this block alone.
Just in my house.
Yes, sir. That was what I was hinting at. So it is, you know, it is a service that I have provided, you know, and it does help us. Um, you know, questions in the past have been, you know, what kind of smoke alarms do I need? What kind of, you know, should I get? If you buy them on your own, that's fine. You know, they have combination units. I would recommend that you get one with a lithium battery. Those last now for 10 years. There's no thinking involved. You know, you get a 10-year detector. When it starts to beep, you know, it'll chirp once about every 5 minutes or so. And that tells you that you need to replace the detector. For the most part, we do not change batteries anymore. If you remember years ago, there was the battery campaign to check your smoke alarms every time we changed our clocks. Well, now with 10-year batteries, we don't do that. Now, it's not to say that we shouldn't be testing them because most of these smoke detectors have test buttons on them. But once it starts to chirp, you know, you need a new one. They're non-serviceable. You just buy a new one or install a new one and you throw the old one away. And there's nothing in the detector that is terrible for a landfill. So if you are concerned about landfill waste, again, the city of Philadelphia through the streets department, each year, usually anywhere from 5 to 6 times a year, they have what they call the hazardous household waste collection. And if you go onto the Philadelphia or city of Philadelphia or phila.gov, go to the streets department, they'll list where all those locations are and what, you know, dates and times. Generally speaking, for us living in the Northwest, the closest place is on Domino Lane, right off of Ridge Avenue.
Mhm.
And on household hazardous waste, they take everything, no questions asked. So a lot of times you'll find people show up with old buckets of paint latex paint. Well, latex paint, you take the lid off, let it dry out in the sun. You can throw it out in the regular garbage. Oil-based paints, on the other hand, they should be properly disposed at the household hazardous waste. If you have old fuel cans, acetone cans, some people have cans of xylene, if they were painters themselves or they like to clean plastic or whatever. They take everything, computer parts, old tires, anything that you may have laying around that your regular trash men will not take. And that's another funny thing about the city of Philadelphia. For the most part, if we put it at the curb, our trash men will take it. And if you get it out there early enough, the junk men will take it before the trash men. It's pretty amazing that we put things out at the curb and they just disappear. Even before the trash department even shows up, or streets department shows up to collect the waste. It's just amazing how stuff just disappears.
Well, if you're looking for any of it, Josh, just knock on my door.
Yes, sir. So, looking at some of the questions, it says, how realistic is it stockpile food for emergencies? I don't think it's that realistic. As I say, we can live without food for approximately 30 days, on just water alone. What to keep in mind since I live alone? Well, canned goods are always good. If you're going to have some food in the home, ShopRite does the can sale. Every now and then Acme does a sale, but canned goods last a long time, and they last a lot longer than the expiration dates on the can. And really, when it comes down to emergencies and when it comes down to you're hungry, are you going to throw the can away because it's expired? No, more than likely you're going to open it. Now, thinking about cans, do you have a manual can opener, versus an electric can opener? And I think most people do have a manual can opener. So, it's nice to have all these cans, but if you can't open them, that could be quite difficult. But there's tricks to that too. You can rub the bottom of a can on a piece of concrete for about 10-15 minutes, and before you know, it's going to break the seal and you'll be able to get into that can. So there are ways around it. Another question was, what kind of fireproof box should I be used for important papers? Again, I'm not going to recommend any one manufacturer. It's all going to be depending upon how much you want to spend. And I did a quick search today on Amazon, and they had flame or fireproof / waterproof pouches for, scanned documents, as I suggested to you guys, for your document pouches. As cheap as $15. So do we really need a safe to put it in? I'm going to say no. What if you lose the keys? What if you lose the combination? How are you going to get into your safe? It's going to be much easier to get into a pouch that's zippered and fireproof and waterproof than it would be a safe or anything like that. Pets in a home, I already covered. How often is the landlord of Gresham Valley Apartments required to update fire extinguishers? So kind of a sidebar, but under the Philadelphia Fire Code, that is a yearly. So apartment complexes, commercial properties, industrial properties, assembly areas to include churches, synagogues, movie theaters. Pretty much, if you have an extinguisher, it should be inspected by a professional yearly, a licensed professional. Yes, sir.
Josh, I have a question. I usually get my fire extinguishers checked by a fire extinguisher company.
Yes.
The one that I've been using for many years has
Yes.
gone out of business. So where do you suggest?
I'm not going to recommend any one place. I would have to do a little bit of research. But I would want them to be licensed. Yes.
Yeah.
Now I know a big outfit in the Philadelphia region is Oliver. So Oliver Sprinkler, and they might be even called Oliver Sprinkler and Fire Extinguishers, but I know they're definitely called Oliver Sprinkler. Now I don't know if they do residential, but I do know that they do commercial and business.
Okay, well, I
And
could.
they might be able to direct you,
Okay.
to another outfit, but they're a pretty big outfit, and I wouldn't be surprised if they would just knock it out. But If they don't come to me. A couple more questions. You know, if there's a fire in the kitchen and the gas stove is involved, what measures should I take to prevent an explosion? More often than not, you won't have an explosion. That's very Hollywood. So what is the gas pressure? So your standard gas pressure in the city of Philadelphia, going from the meter down to our appliances, is a 1/4 pound of pressure per foot. That's not a lot of pressure. So let's say that I had a leak in a pipe, you know, and I smell gas, you know. So natural gas, as we know, is odorless. So they add mercaptan, and mercaptan smells like rotten eggs. So when we smell the rotten eggs, we know we have a gas leak. If I had a leak in my pipe, I could wrap it a couple times with some electrical tape and get, you know, a pipe fitter out there or the gas department out there to replace the pipe. So we're not talking about a lot of pressure. If it's on fire, well, then it's already consuming the gas. So you're not going to build up enough gas in your property where you would have to worry about explosion because it's already on fire. If the fire's small, of course, what's one of the first things we wanted to do? Turn the burners off. You turn the burners off, more than likely it's going to stop the fire. Don't put water on it. You know, if it's a grease fire, you'll just make it larger. Don't put flour. So that was an old, you know, an old wives' tale that you can throw some flour on it to smother it. But flour is flammable. So that could potentially make the fire larger. So if you can, I would say shut the burners off. If you can't, get out and call 911. Well, now you left your phone inside the house. Well, you start banging on your neighbors' houses and tell them that you have a fire. More often than not, and many police officers will tell you this too, when you're in distress, if you start yelling fire, you will get a response from the local community first before you started yelling help. So something to consider, you know, if you're in dire straits, you know, if you can get to a window or get outside your property and start banging on your neighbor's property and you start yelling fire, they'll come to your aid much quicker than if you were just yelling help, help, help.
Yeah. Josh, we're going to have to wrap it up here.
Okay.
I'm sure that there are more questions, but you are an amazing fount of information. You've already filled our brains. Some of them have exploded already. So
I did my job.
so you did your job. So we're going to have to clean up the kitchen here.
Well, are there any questions from any of the participants that I did not answer, or, you know, because I think this was blocked out until 9 o'clock, right?
White squares.
No,
No.
usually 8,
Usually 8.
but, or a little less.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
apologize for going over.
No,
no,
that's
that's
okay.
fine,
Central time, it's 9 o'clock.